Okay, so I want to thank United Plant Savers and the International Herb Symposium for allowing us to connect today over this wonderful subject of gardening by the moon. I'm just so fascinated on how all of life fits together, and herbs helped open that door for me. So I'm really excited to share this information with you today. So on the screen right now, we have a picture of my farm. And what I love about this picture is that it shows what an amazing place that we live in Wisconsin, in the Baraboo Bluffs. We're not surrounded by other agriculture. There's about 9,000 acres of protected land around us because we have a lot of migrating birds that come through, and Nature Conservancy considers this one of the last great places. So, we're just so grateful to have all this pristine environment around us that's not, full of agricultural drift. And plus, there are some cool populations of plants in those hills too that are healthy enough for me to collect bits from. And yeah, so it's a wonderful place to be. Um, the subject of gardening by the moon is just really such a cool one because it expands your practices of gardening. So, for example, my story goes from here, maybe I'll switch this out. Oops. And just tell my little story first. So, um, I got into herbs because well, first of all, I have a horticulture degree. And the reason I studied horticulture was when I had to pick out a subject for college, I just knew that I had to be outside. And one thing that brought me back to this was I had this memory of picking blueberries with my grandmother in the woods. And that just made such an impact on me. I was so little. I probably was 3 or 5, but that moment of collecting things in the woods left such an impression on me where I really felt my heart sing. So I just knew that I had to be outside for a career. And so I went to school for horticulture, and one of my lucky breaks is that my first job out of college, I was asked to put in a herb garden. So from there, I learned about how to grow various herbs, and this was in a more of a formal setting in an herb garden. And so I started using those herbs for cooking and crafts. And then eventually got married, and my son was born. And that was that was in 87. And I started, my little family then had some little issues. So like when my son had an earache, I just wanted to give it a try herbs. So I'd been to the doctor, and that was the middle of the 80s when there was way overuse of antibiotics. So I just thought, well, what does nature have to offer us? And, I had my herb garden at home. I had quit my job, built a greenhouse, and thought my career was going to be to grow herb plants. But when I tried mullein in olive oil in his ear for his earache, I just couldn't believe the results. It was just so amazing to see 2 drops of that worked way better than anything that I had been to the doctor, that the doctor could give me. And I realized that I was opening up a beautiful box of, wonderful medicines that were going to come from nature. So I started, trying those, trying herbs for every kind of thing, and which is what I've been doing for the last 34 years. Yeah, I just love how nature's here to support us. And just, I'm sure so many of you have had this experience too. When you get into herbalism, it just helps to expand your connection with the earth, with our position as an earth steward. And, you get this sense that nature is truly here to support us, and that, we work in a partnership. And it's just been a really lovely career that I've had. just expanding like that. And what's so cool about this gardening by the moon is, it's like a layer, like I just told my story. It went from a girl who liked picking blueberries to a horticulture degree to specializing in herbs and then learning how to use them for well-being. And then came organic gardening, or certified organic rather. And that was around 1989. And so I wanted to become certified organic. So I had to change all my practices. I was a UW, University of Wisconsin graduate. So of course I didn't have organic techniques in those days in my toolkit. So I learned all about that. And so from there, my next step was gardening by the moon. I just became fascinated with it. So I started incorporating those practices. And so that's been a couple decades now. And so I'm happy to share that information with you. Right now, here, I'm going to get out of this. Oops, no, not that. Let's see here. I just wanted to get screen share. Okay. So this is where I am right now. This is my apothecary, which is 8 miles from my farm. I'm renting an old bank in North Freedom, which is a 4 stop sign town. And what I do with all my herbs is create products. So these are some of my top sellers. And, I'm just so amazed with how herbs help us. Even though I based my whole career on it, it just keeps astounding me. Okay. All right. So as I was saying, organic gardening, this is the next degree. You can take it to another level. Organic gardening is not just the avoidance of chemicals. In a larger view, it is organic living using nature's laws. And you'll see that with organics, just how the pieces start, and herbalism too. You just start seeing how things come together and how really we're all sort of pieces of the gigantic puzzle. And so it's been really fascinating for me. Now I'm taking classes through the Kepler College. It's a great college for astrology. So I can learn more about those parts too, and incorporate them in my toolkit. And you'll really learn how nature follows cycles. I mean, of course, we know that just from every morning and every night and every season. But looking at this through this lens of gardening by the moon, you get into it a lot more. So you can consider the waxing moon as a growth period for life and plants, and the waning moon as a resting time. That's just it in a nutshell. But with gardening, of course, you're joining forces with nature. So what about gardening by the moon? Well, it's used to fine tune your organic gardening practices. And one thing I really like, it offers a rhythm to your gardening aspects. I love this. Once I was giving this talk and somebody called in and she said, well, I get it, because if you're farming, you have way too much to do every day. So by looking at what moon sign the moon is in, that will help determine what chores you should be doing that day. Well, I thought that was really well put. And that is how I've been choosing what am I doing this day for a long time, as much as possible. I mean, sometimes there's just days when you have to plant and days when you have to harvest. But it's nice to have a little guide when you're overwhelmed a lot. And the most basic part of this is plant when the moon is waxing and harvest as the moon is waning. And the moon, even if we're in a culture that we don't really get that the moon can influence things happening on Earth, the moon aspects are still listed in today's newspapers under the best fishing day. That has to do with the moon. And those who live by the oceans, it's very clear that moon phases affect ocean tides. You can see it throughout every month. And seeds respond to my magnetic fields by sending roots down. In fact, it's not light that determines how the seed knows to send its radical down and its shoot up. It's the way the earth spins. It's the magnetic field that determines how, which way the seed will grow. So this was a great question I had once too. Like, wait a minute, if it goes like Aries is in April, Taurus is in May, April, yeah, and it's so on. What is with the moon sign? Well, when you talk about, like, for example, I'm a double Aries, born on April 4th at 5:50 in the morning, so that makes me a double Aries. And but that's your sun sign. So the sun sign changes every month, or every 28 days more accurately. And the sun is more of an outward influence, more like your personality. But the moon is shifting quicker than that. So the moon sign changes every 2.5 to 3 days. And the moon influences are more inward, like emotions, for example. And so how does the moon influence planting? Well, water is influenced by the moon more than the sun. Like you can see that in the tide changes monthly. Even though the sun is larger, the moon is closer to the earth. So the strongest effect is felt when the moon and sun pull from the opposite sides of the earth, and that's the full moon. And high tides occur when they are on the same side, and the new moon as well. I have a diagram to show you that. So here we have a diagram of the earth, the moon, and the sun. And what this shows us is that when there's a new moon or full moon, it's just pulling more of the water to the surface. So that's what this diagram shows. And then a solar eclipse occurs when the new moon passes directly between the earth and the sun. And that's always on a full moon, or a new moon rather. This is a fun one for me because I've only had one person, and I probably taught this class to more than 1,000 people over several years, but nobody knows when the new moon rises. And I know that we're recording this so people can just tune in at their convenience. But if I had a crowd and I asked, when does the new moon rise? Everyone looks stumped. It's quite phenomenal to know that we live in a culture that is just not tuned into this at all. And the clue that I like to give for this is, when does the full moon rise? And then people start getting it, because we've all had the experience of being outside and seeing the sunset and the moon rising at the same time. Well, that is, anyway, so the full moon rises at 6 o'clock or so, or thereabouts, depending upon what time zone you're in, or, it just depends on the time of year too, and the angle of the sun. But basically the full moon rises at sunset. But the new moon rises at dawn, and that's why we never see it. So the first quarter rises when the moon is at the first quarter. It rises at noon and sets at midnight. And when it's the third quarter, it rises at midnight and sets at noon. And that's why when you look at the sky various times of the month, you'll see the sun out, or the moon out rather, during the day. So this is a good thing to know, that the new moon rises at dawn, and that's why we never see it. Just think, this used to be the regular calendar that people would, run their lives by just following the moon phases. And here's just a diagram of the different phases of the moon. And that's where we're going to start, is talking about the different influences of each of these moon phases. So we'll start with the new moon, and that begins the first quarter. That's also known as the first quarter, the new moon to the first quarter. It's the at the new moon, the gravity is starts to pull water up. So right before the moon, it's like a very quiet time. There's more decreasing energy. So then you get the new moon and it starts to pull energy up. The water starts coming closer to the surface. So it helps to encourage seeds to swell and burst. And even in the increasing moonlight helps for balanced shoot and leaf and root growth. So they say this is the best time for planting above ground crops that have their seeds outside the fruit, such as cabbage, lettuce, broccoli, cauliflower, and grain crops. And it's fun because there's exceptions to these rules. I find that's true in nature. There's usually an exception to the rule. So cucumbers like this first moon phase as well, even though they have their seeds inside the fruit. So the first, in a nutshell, the new moon to the first quarter is for planting, but for planting plants that have their seeds outside the fruit. So the second quarter is for planting seeds that have their seeds inside the fruit. So the gravitational pull is less, but the moonlight is strong. So even the moonlight can create some leaf growth. It's a good time for planting, especially 2 days before the full moon. So I'm in this meditation group that we have a practice of doing a full moon meditation every month. And we consider that there's full moon energy for 5 to 7 days around the full moon. So 2 or 3 days before the full moon, and then 2 or 3 days after the full moon. All of those days, you have the energy of the full moon. I know for me, I can't sleep 2 days before the full moon. It's just, there's just so much energy in the air or whatever it is. I just have difficulty sleeping when we are 2 days, and it's pretty standard, 2 days before the full moon. So as I said, it's a good time for planting annuals that produce their seeds inside the fruit, like peas, melons, beans, squash, and tomatoes. And you can also establish lawns because you're looking for leaf growth in the first or second quarter. This will help speed along the growth. And this would be helpful for cover crops. Like for me, I've just planted a bunch of oats and buckwheat for cover crops. Like when one crop goes out, like chamomile comes out early, then we come in with a cover crop. So the third quarter begins at the full moon. And so the full moon, the moon wanes or gets smaller after the full moon, and then the energy starts drawing down. The gravitational pull is high, it creates more moisture in the soil, but the moonlight is starting to decrease, and so it pulls more energy into the roots. So this is a good time for planting perennials or like trees or things like that, things where you want to really establish good root growth and not as much caring about the tops. Like for example, when you plant perennials, if they start to flower, it's best to pinch those off to encourage the roots to grow more strong. So this goes into this old axiom, plant potatoes on Good Friday. And I wish it was a live class where I could ask, who has ever heard of that? But usually there's about 1 in 50 who remembers this old folklore about plant potatoes on Good Friday. And the deal with that is it's the third quarter. not everybody knows that Easter is chosen by picking the first Sunday after the spring equinox, after the full moon. So it goes, you have to have the first full moon of spring, and then after that, the next Sunday is Easter. So it's always in the third quarter because it's past the full moon. And so this is a time for root growth. And in fact, my husband was planting potatoes in the wrong quarter last year. And I said, hey, why don't you just save me about, like a quarter of those, and I'll plant them at the correct moon phase and we'll just make a comparison. And sure enough, he came in after starting to dig up his potatoes, and he was very discouraged. He said, they're small, there's not too many, they're just not that great. And then I dug up the potatoes, and the ones that I planted, and there were some very sizable ones, and I was really happy. So this year he planted them exactly in the right quarter, right past the new moon. Hopefully, I think in an earth sign as well, which also favors roots. And anyway, we dug up our first potatoes last week, and they are looking good. So I think he's converting. I think he's convinced. So here we have the last quarter of the moon, and there's an interesting tip that I would like to share with everyone. And because in the first quarter, the moon is shaped like a D. And so there's this tip, it's just the little word acronym DOC, and the letter D will be the shape of the first quarter moon. So if you look up in the sky any time of the month and you see that there's, the moon shaped like a D, you'll know you're in the first quarter. And then the letter O represents the full moon. And then the letter C then would be the third quarter. So in this picture, you'll see that the moon is shaped like the letter C. So this is the third quarter, going into the fourth quarter. And this is when there's decreased gravitational pull and moonlight. The moon is getting smaller. This last quarter is considered a resting period. It's really like a death and destroy time. So for setting traps, for ending projects, for weeding, you want to kill all your weeds and those sorts of things. This is the right time for those activities. And those activities are best done in the barren signs of like Leo, Gemini, Virgo, Aquarius, Sagittarius, or Aries. So we have the drier signs, the air or fire signs. I used to have this shrub that would grow up. It was a viburnum, and it would grow up past my windows, and it was only meant to be up to the windows. So this is when I would prune it back once a year in one of the dry signs in the fourth quarter, because once I pruned it, it would just stay that same short height and not keep growing up. So I had to prune it several times in the summer, and it worked really well for me. So yeah, this is a useful time too. There are times for death and destroying as well as growing things. Good time for weeding and mulching. So now we're going to add the next layer to all of this. And so we've covered the moon phases, and now we're going to add the symbols of the zodiac. As I mentioned before, the moon is moving through every month. The moon moves through all 12 zodiac signs. You can even see them in the sky, all the zodiac star forms. All lined up in the sky. And so the moon moves through these and picks up the influence of these throughout the month. And starting with Aries, so Aries, well, I think we're going to go to the next slide and that'll show you a little more. But this shows you the rhythm of everything. And that's one thing I really like, and I'm really trying hard to learn, is just, this is another just piece of the puzzle of how we all fit together on this big planet. And it's so comforting in a way to see that there is a rhythm for everything. Like even with this pandemic we've been going through, it's like there's a time for more trauma to come to the earth. And then, but knowing that, you know that it's going to end. And this is just something like that bumper sticker. Oh no, not another learning experience. So yeah, we have to go through all of this, but there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. So I loved learning this too, and how these zodiac signs have, you get the symbolism. And it dawned on me just looking at this stuff year after year that really these are just archetypal symbols, that the energy came before the name. Like I picture old astronomers and astrologers looking at the sky, year after year, no TV, no lights at night, lots of time for observing. And, they would just know, like, first comes the energy of Aries. And gosh, the way it just jumps in there, it's kind of like a ram, just so full of energy. And then it settles into this Taurus energy of like all of that sprouting, or that energy coming up is going to sprout things. So even by looking at these symbols, you can start to gather the energy or the archetype behind all of this. So with Aries, Aries comes in April, begins late March, and it, like, there you have the energy coming out of the earth. It's thawing, it's ready to go. Taurus to me shows a seed that sprouted. And then Gemini, like equal growth, bringing the roots strong to the tops. And, so it goes. So I love trying to make more sense out of all of this. So, by looking at these, you start to get some of the energy behind them. Provides a really good insight. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the air signs. And so the air signs are a drier sign. There are 4 elements in astrology: air, earth, fire, and water. And that's what I named my company after, the 4 elements. As a gardener, I use them every day. And we all do, but especially it's obvious as a gardener. So the air signs, these are drier, so they're better for cultivation and harvesting. But they're also considered semi-fruitful, but they favor flowers. Like when you picture flowers, they're more on the top, like where the air is. So that's the representation of the flowers. And for all of the elements, air, earth, fire, and water, there are the cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs. And I was just so happy to learn this more recently, what was up with those. So the cardinal sign is a leading or initiating sign and always brings in the new season. So there's something new and exciting about the cardinal signs. They're, a little more charged up and ready to go. And then you move into the middle of the season, the fixed sign. So the fixed signs are the ones that are most iconic in a way of those elements. So they're going to stay that way. They're going to represent that element. And that's the fixed sign. But the mutable signs, they're versatile. And because they're going to be moving into the next season, all the mutable signs, so they're a little more charged up too. They know how to mutate kind of from one season to the next. So that's the deal with mutable signs. So we have the cardinal sign Libra in air, fixed is Aquarius, and mutable is Gemini. So the earth signs are great for planting and they favor root growth, of course. The cardinal earth sign is Capricorn, fixed is Taurus, and mutable is Virgo. So earth signs are great for planting, but Virgo is known to be not fruitful. And it took me probably 10 years of just practicing gardening by the moon. And I was wondering why, if it's an earth sign, isn't it favorable for fruiting? Well, it's because it's the Virgin. It represents the Virgin. Virgo is all about beauty and organization, but it's not about bearing fruit. So Virgo is excellent for flowers. They say for flowers or vines, things that you plant for beauty, but not for fruit. So this wouldn't be for your tomato crop or your cucumber crop. And Taurus is great. I mean, that both Taurus and Capricorn have affinity for garden and farms. And we'll talk about that a little more later. So the fire signs are another, of course, really dry sign. So they're good for cultivating, harvesting, drying, pruning to stop growth, and eliminating things. The cardinal is Aries, fixed is Leo, and the mutable is Sagittarius. So it's Aries is good for destroying not just growths. Leo is the most barren of all, because when it's a fixed sign, it's most representative of that element. So Leo, of course, is very barren, but mutable Sagittarius, you could plant onions and garlic. Has an affinity with the earth sign, which is coming up next after Sagittarius. You have Capricorn. So that's an earth sign. So it has some of that mutable quality. And that's why you could plant onions or garlic or perhaps other root crops. So the water signs, of course, are great for planting and irrigation, and they favor leafy annuals. Like for me, it's easy to imagine that water is representative of the leaf. Like, for example, you have air is for flowers, earth is for roots, water is for leaves, and then the fire is for seeds. The cardinal water sign is Cancer, the fixed sign is Scorpio, and mutable Pisces. Okay, so now we can get into the various gardening aspects here. So here I am weeding, not sure what. I'm prepping the soil. I like to put hills on things where I harvest the roots, or for the Mediterranean plants that need really good drainage, like thyme, rosemary, sage. All of those are planted on hills. And we do have a hiller on the back of the tractor, but this is just a partial row. So I'm preparing it here. So turn the soil in the first or second quarter in a barren sign, because you're just prepping the soil. You don't want it to, you're not planting that day. And the reason that you do this when there's an expansion is because it's lightening up the soil. The soil's a little lighter. So you can rake it into hills or rows, something like that, just kind of to prep the soil. Then, even though the slide is cultivation for eliminating weeds, this is a picture of my husband who is mowing down his cover crop of buckwheat. And it's in full flower there. It's excellent crop. And this is how he's made all of our fields, which used to just be goldenrod, monarda, not just, I love those plants too. But we, had just plants of wild, both native and Eurasian species, that he created these very fertile, wonderful soil fields from by planting cover crops. And this is, as I said, a buckwheat crop, and he's mowing it down. But that is one of our methods for eliminating weeds. Like we have a problem with portulaca in our fields, and so and thistles moved into my perennial area. So I'm just taking sections out and putting in cover crops. And buckwheat is such a good one because it sprouts so quickly. Its leaves are very broad and they're very horizontal. So it blocks all the sun from going in and letting the weeds thrive. And they grow really fast. So here you have this, all of a sudden, this massive amount of shade that the weeds just can't grow in. So anyway, buckwheat rocks. Okay, so but for eliminating weeds, you do that in the waning moon, especially the fourth quarter. As I mentioned, that's for death and destroy. And in the barren signs, which we have the fire signs and air signs, but Virgo is added here because it is a barren sign. So kind of to summarize the planting signs and to talk about some of the nuances between them. So Capricorn, for the earth signs, Capricorn is very productive, but a bit dry. So think of the symbol of the goat. So the goat goes up the mountain. You know, it's not like the cow, Taurus, the next sign, that's standing on the ground. So it has a little more dry quality to it. It's good for root crops and encouraging strong and sturdy growth. You know, as I ponder why plants and planets and signs all fit together, I really use the symbolism a lot. I find it very helpful to understand how these fit together, these archetypes. So, you know, Capricorn, it's the goat. So it's very strong and sturdy. In fact, it's recommended to put fences in during the Capricorn moon. Taurus, the symbol is the cow, really, not as much the bull, because it's a very nurturing mother. Really calm and quiet. Taurus is productive and moist, good for planting and transplanting, great for leafy vegetables and root crops. In fact, the moon was in Taurus last weekend, and I just knew I was in such a weeding mode because we have our big farm day this coming weekend, and I just wanted to plant my lettuce, but alas, I didn't. I'll have to wait until it moves into, I think it'll be Virgo next. So anyway, then there's Virgo, which we mentioned. It's barren, but moist. It's great for flowers and vines, not fertile, as I had mentioned before, but really wonderful for beauty. It's great for organizing things during a Virgo moon, and just, you know, going out there and making your gardens prettier. So water, the water signs, Cancer, these of course are very fruitful and moist. Cancer is the crab. And, you know, picture that little crab all moist inside, and it's good for quick germination and good growth. And it's really one of the best signs for planting. Scorpio as well is fruitful and moist, but it's good for sturdy plants and vines like tomatoes, squash, and corn. Also good for transplanting. And I picture the outer shell on the Scorpio, just like when it says good for for grafting. I think of that outer shell of the scorpion and how it's moist inside. And, you know, I just make that correlation between an outer shell and grafting. And then Pisces is the fish. So of course it's very productive and moist. It's the second best sign for planting, and especially good for roots. Well, the fish is below the earth's surface, you know, it's in the water. So therefore it's especially good for roots. And so this is just a review, just to make sure, because this is complicated stuff and I just want you to start thinking like this. But when would you plant astragalus, for example? Well, I would plant it in an earth sign in the third quarter, you know, if I'm lucky. I mean, you don't always get the exact right timing, but you do the best you can. So astragalus, that would be good, but for sure in the third quarter because it's a perennial, and maybe Pisces because that's another root crop. It could be under that water sign, but Pisces because that's good for roots. Calendula is an annual, so that would be, and the seeds are produced outside the fruit, so that would be the first quarter, and in an air sign because airs favor flowers. Lemon balm, it's a perennial, so that would be a good third quarter plant, and it's leafy, so we could go with the water sign. Skullcap is perennial. It's leaves. So again, just like lemon balm, third quarter, and probably in a water sign. That would be ideal. So now we're going to talk about the harvest and cultivating signs, which of course are the more barren signs like fire and air. So Aries, starting with Aries, barren and dry. It's good for harvest, for storing. It's also good for destroying weeds and pests. And Leo is barren and dry, good for cultivating. I mean, it's the driest of all the signs. It is the fixed fire sign. So then it's good for destroying weeds and pests. Sagittarius is barren and dry, good for harvesting, roots and fruits for storage, and good for cultivation. That one is mutable, and favorite could be good for roots. So air, the signs are Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini. Libra is semi-fruitful and moist, best sign for beauty and fragrant flowers and herbs. Just even though it's a dry sign, it's air, so it's great for flowers and herbs, and the energy of Libra is so balanced, and good for beauty like Virgo is. So anyway, that's a really good one for harvesting. But anyway, it's got that also that extra aspect for beauty and flowers. So Aquarius is very barren and dry. Another good one for harvesting and for fruit storage. Cultivate and destroy pests and weeds, or plant onion sets. Gemini, very barren and dry, harvest roots and fruits for storage and destroy weeds and pests. Most of them are similar. There's just a little nuance. So for canning, freezing, and drying, here I have a slide of some of the roots that I've harvested. One year, I see elecampane, comfrey, astragalus, and burdock, I think. Anyway, so canning is good in a fixed sign like Cancer and Scorpio, because you want your produce to stay right in as close to fresh picked as possible. For example, we made pickles over the past weekend, and we just, for one thing, we just had to get them canned as quickly as possible to keep them crunchy. It's important to keep the crunch in the pickles. So we got them harvested and canned them right away. Drying is best done in a barren sign in the waning moon. So the third or fourth quarter. That's when the energy is getting less and drying up. So that's great for harvesting herbs and roots. There is some talk in some of the literature about harvesting fruits more around the full moon when they're packed full of nutrients and more moist. So you might have to experiment with that, because I've seen it in the literature both ways. And then, of course, there's times when you just have to harvest when the produce is ripe. These are just guidelines that you shoot for and play around with. You're going to it's really fun to hear about the successes with people that I've taught the subject to, and myself included. It's just really fun to see once you start playing around with this. It's almost like magic. It's like white magic playing with this, because you just get great results, and it's, your intention is to be in harmony with nature, and you know, you just want to learn the rhythms of life and you jump in there and you get great results. So it's really fun. I hope I inspire others to do this. It's just quite a learning experience. Um, and Taurus is good for canning, freezing, and drying because it rules collections of things. And Capricorn rules farms, gardens, and rewards for work well done. I have two kids who are Capricorn, and they have put themselves on their paths and they just follow them step after step after step. And, you know, they're serious about their work and they get rewarded for their job well done. And it's really, really wonderful to see that. So when to harvest herbs? So when the dew is dry, for me, that would be around 10 a.m. But before the essential oils have volatilized, so before noon, and then for drying, you would collect in the waning moon when they'll dry faster. So after the full moon in the third or fourth quarter. You collect leaves just as the plant is coming into bloom. That's when the constituents are at their peak. And for us, we collect our flowers twice a week. Our flowers, things like arnica, calendula, chamomile. The more you pick them, the more they rebloom. So you'll get a better harvest. So the more, yeah, so we just try to pick them, like I said, twice a week. And then the roots are gathered after a frost or in the early spring, just as they begin to emerge, and you can identify where they are. That because the root is a storage organ, you know, you want to harvest that when all of the constituents are kind of stuck in their in the root. So those are the best times for harvest roots. And barks, you harvest in the spring or fall. And I like to harvest them when either the leaves are just emerging or right after the leaves are or when they're falling. So I know that the constituents are running through the branches right then. And then, of course, plan B is harvest when you are there and the plant is there. There's just times like that. Where you just can't help it. And then I just wanted to show this cool harvester that we got last year. It was from New Zealand. This is such an awesome piece of equipment. You can raise or lower it. Here we're just harvesting the tops of oats collected in the milky stage. And you can lower it so you can get your perennial herbs and not just scalp them or your annuals and cut them down to the ground. It's so great because it has like a sickle bar mower at the bottom, and then it lifts it up with those tread things. And then there's a conveyor belt that moves it into the basket back by the person harvesting. So anyway, if you're interested, you have to move now because this gentleman is going out of business. But it's Harvester Concepts out of New Zealand, and it takes 2.5 months to get to America. Okay, so for drying, this is our drying shed, and our drying shed is a 10 by 12 that has been shed that you just get from any kind of household supply store. Like for us, we have Menards, but Home Depot or Lowe's or those sorts of places. So you can just get the kit of the shed, make the shed, and then we retrofitted it with 3 by 3 wire racks, a 1/2 inch wire mesh so that you can garble through those. For some of the smaller things, we put sheets or cotton cloth so the petals don't fall through. And it's run on a dehumidifier. We don't have a heater in there. In fact, on hot days, I don't turn it on, and we do have solar panels. So this is all run out of sun energy. Anyway, we can fit a lot in there, and we really keep it moving, probably from May to October through October. That thing is just cranking out the herbs. So yeah, and you want untreated wood. That's very toxic, the treated wood. So you definitely want to use untreated wood on the inside for your racks. Drying is done in the waning moon in the third or fourth quarter in the drier signs, like the fire and the air signs. So pickles are again in the third or fourth quarter for putting things away in fixed signs like Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, or Cancer. Those are the fixed signs. Water signs are not favorable except for Scorpio. And again, I look at the archetype of Scorpio, which has a moist inside but a hard outer shell. That's the only thing I can figure out why Scorpio would still be good for canning pickles. So here are some other ways you can apply the moon phases. And this really worked for me. You know, some of this stuff sounds just silly or like, how could it be? But, you know, when you try this, just like when you tried herbs, you know, you'll just find that nature is really there to work with us. So you can clean the garden shed when the moon is in Libra or Virgo. Those are very tidy signs. And I've done that before. And somebody who resists cleaning, I'd rather start a new project. I'm Aries, right? So anyway, I've tried it and it was so smooth. A lot of times when you clean, you get stuck on like, do I keep it or throw it away or where do I put this? But just try cleaning when the moon is in Libra or Virgo and I think you might notice a difference. Things get very smooth. So plan parties when the moon is in Virgo, you know, for beauty, Gemini for conversation, Libra for balance. Do not have surgeries around the full moon. I had heard that it was illegal in Europe to have surgeries around the full moon in the 1800s and before that, because there's so much blood pulsating outward that if you can have an elective surgery, do not have it around the full moon. Better in the third or fourth quarter when things are slowing down. You know, and you talk to doctors, if you know any doctors, and they'll say that there are definitely more, you know, babies being born around the full moon. And if you talk to cops, there's a lot more accidents as well. There's a lot of pulsating energy. So put fences in Capricorn. That is like a very sturdy sign. You know, picture the goat climbing up the mountain again. Prune in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius to reduce the growth, and especially in the fourth quarter. And start projects at the new moon. That's a great time for beginnings. And then you end projects in the fourth quarter. I like to think of it like this. So say you wanted to paint a room. You would like get your paints together at the new moon, you know, go figure out your color. Well, you'd get your paints and then you'd like paint for the first 2 weeks. And then there would be the full moon. And then it should like come to, you know, you can be kind of done with it. And then like the third week, you might be picking up. And then the fourth week would be like reflecting on that. Now, do I need another room painted? You know, or maybe just somehow summarizing that. So you end projects in the fourth quarter. Graft in Capricorn or Cancer. Have dental care in Virgo. Virgo is very tidy and organized and beautiful. Can or pickle in Scorpio, Taurus, or Aquarius. Control insects in Aries, Sagittarius, Gemini, Leo, or Aquarius. And I love this one, go camping in Sagittarius. And I picture the archer, you know, just looking up at the beautiful nature, taking time away from work and, you know, just observing nature. So I love that symbol of Sagittarius for camping. And here's just some of my gardening tips. So start slow growing or cool season plants first. In my region, zone 4, I start around Valentine's Day, like onions and parsley and perennial herbs such as lavender, the slower growing things. about 8 weeks before the frost date. And we happen to have heat mats and lights. That really helps. I mean, I don't know if you can grow a transplant in a northern location without grow lights. And when they're little, you can put the lights very close to the transplants because they're just germinating. They're just so small. So lights really help. And they're so easy to get now too. There's a lot of good ones that are low energy, don't take a lot of energy. And I love to do cuttings. Plant propagation is one of my favorite things. So I have this really great mix I learned from my mentor, Chris Hopka, which is 1 part peat to 2 parts perlite. And that's, I mix that up, water it so you don't breathe the dust. You don't want to breathe perlite dust or peat dust. And then mix it up, and that makes a wonderful rooting mix. If you keep that moist, I mean, people think that plants will need water when you take a cutting because they don't have roots. Well, they need air equal to what they need for moisture. So it's very important to have a rooting mix that's full of air pockets. And that's what I really like perlite for. So move plants outside to harden off before planting, preferably on a still or overcast day. I mean, I made that mistake before. Even still, I moved one of my house plants out in the shade. It was a very cloudy day and it's still singed. It's just because it doesn't get hardly any light, you know, considering the transition. It doesn't hardly get any light in a house in Wisconsin in the winter. There's just not much light at all. And then to move it outside, even in a shady place on a cloudy day, was enough to scorch it. So be attentive of days till harvest. Harvest flowers every couple days to twice a week to increase production. I mentioned that earlier. And then heavily mulch perennials. So we have big perennial areas, and as much as we weed them and keep them clean and mulch, we use lots of leaf mulch. Still, eventually they get weedy, and every about 5 years, we have to move our whole perennial section and start over again. And that can be done either by using seeds and starting transplants from seeds, or division, which gives you such a nice jump start if you can just divide your plants. And soil improvement is key, just to keep adding organic matter every year. And if you're certified organic, you know that you have to take your soil out of production and put cover crops in to just rejuvenate your soil. And that's a great technique, not only for your soil, but for CO2, because all those plants are eating CO2 as they grow. And you can rejuvenate your soil and help the air as well. I'd like to conclude with is Robin Rahl Kimmer. She's one of my wonderful teachers. I love this book so much. And she has in one of these is the Thanksgiving address. And this is just one of the paragraphs. So there's 15 in this traditional Onondaga prayer. It's so beautiful. I really encourage you all to read it. You know, what all we can be grateful for. It just is mind-blowing how much gratitude we can feel in this. And this really kind of spells it all out bit by bit. And this one is so appropriate for this talk. We give thanks to the stars who are spread across the sky like jewelry. We see them at night, helping the moon to light the darkness and bringing dew to the gardens and growing things. When we travel at night, they guide us home. With our minds gathered as one, we send greetings and thanks to all the stars. Now our minds are one. So I encourage you to read this book if you haven't. And speaking of books, I brought a couple others to show you. So when I got started, I still do, I get the Old Farmer's Almanac every year, and towards the back, it will tell you best days for This one is for 2021. And it's really fun. It used to be more farmy, but now they've made it more contemporary, where before it was like best time to dehorn your cattle, best time to castrate cattle. Actually, I have a story about that. I got a little bull calf from a neighbor and was going to raise for beef as beef cows. It's just good to keep my pasture down and munched down by cows. So anyway, I said, does that come with a castration job? And he said, sure. And he picked a day, and I looked at my farmer's almanac and I said, well, I found out that there's just a couple days later is when the moon is going to be in the right sign. And he said, sure, I'll just come then. And he said there was really no blood. It was the cleanest job that he'd ever done. And he was just amazed because he was not that type of guy to believe in this kind of thing. So anyway, this is a very fun one. And then every year, I'll show you, I've been making a gardening by the moon calendar. So it takes me a couple of months, like January and February, and I have a key. Uh-oh, it's noon here, and we're going to get this bell. But here's a little key for planting, harvesting, pruning, parties, plant flowers. And anyway, so that's another option. You can check my website in the spring. And here's the website. You can check it for class schedules, my herbal products, and the moon calendars, 4elementsherbals.com. And sign up for my newsletter. I also have gardening tips and what's happening on the farm. And that's it. So, wait, your screen sharing. Here, I want to stop the sharing and go to live. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I just think it's such a wonderful subject to look at how the planets can influence us as just another piece of this lovely puzzle we're all in together. It's such a big subject. I'll never get to know all of it, but it's been fun taking classes at the Kepler College. Oh, there was one more book I was going to show you. And this is by my teacher, Will Morris. It's called Cycles. And he talks a lot about just the whole cycles, revolutionary tools for the practitioner. You can start seeing how all of this fits together, weaving together Culpeper's knowledge and his more contemporary knowledge, his Chinese knowledge of Chinese medicine and Tao, etc. Anyway, there's so much information out there, and I appreciate that you took the time today to share this interest of mine with me, and I hope you can utilize this and move forward with some of this old-timey knowledge. All right, well, take care, and thanks to the International Herb Symposium and UPS.